Thank you so much. Cool. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I am going to talk to you today about how to share cars in your neighbourhood. So I'm going to go through a short overview of the car sharing landscape for about 5 minutes. Then I'm going to explain how I did it, or how the approach works in general. And then Scott and I will talk about setting up a new one, because Scott's setting up his own in Florence Park. Great. So why should we share cars? Well, it kind of depends what you believe. Boris Johnson says we can reach net zero without so much as a hair shirt in sight. But the Science Committee Select Report says that widespread personal vehicle ownership isn't compatible with decarbonisation. And I think this is true. You know, scientists recognise we need to restrict demand. Politicians are unwilling to look at this. But basically, if you believe that we need to reduce usage and carbon, we're going to have to start solving stuff ourselves. And that is why car sharing came up as an idea. And our goal now is to see if we can get 1 million cars off the streets of the UK by the end of 2025 by car sharing, because the more cars that are shared, the less people need to own cars, and the less people own cars, the less people use cars. So this is the big picture. This is the goal. So personal car usage, you know, it's a problem. That cars are expensive, they're underutilized, they obviously cause air pollution, and they cause climate change. So we're not using them a lot. I've got some stats here on the left, but I'm happy to share this presentation afterwards. I'll just sort of pull out a couple. You know, 27% of UK emissions comes from transport, and road traffic vehicles is 90% of that. Cars and vans are a huge and very significant problem. The stat that I like comes at the bottom, but if you get rid of a car, if you no longer own a car, it saves you the same carbon as 20 flights to Rome. It's like a massive contributor to the average family's carbon footprint. Cars are not used properly. Most car journeys are 40% of car journeys are under 2 miles. The average car is only used 3% of the time, and it's parked 97% of the time. EVs are good, but they are not that much less polluting, and many at the moment use dirty electricity. We should definitely be switching to EVs, but switching to EVs alone is not enough. Then sort of up to 50% of a car's emissions is in its manufacture. Depending on when it was made, they've become much more efficient. Modern cars are probably lower than that. But still, if you use somebody else's car for the same distance, you're still saving emissions. And if you don't own a car, you're actually much less likely to use a car as much, as I've found myself since selling mine. Finally, cars are expensive. You know, they are. The average UK car is about £300 a month. It's 50% more if it's financed, including depreciation, etc. They're expensive. We don't use them. They're not great for the environment. That is the challenge with cars. Of course, they are very convenient. So why would you, what are the benefits of sharing cars? Why is sharing cars a solution? Well, if you share cars, you're sharing the cost of car ownership. So you're sharing the £300 a month among more people. You end up with cleaner air, you end up with more space. And hopefully, as is shown in this picture from my street, where my children are playing out on the street, you end up with a nicer environment for people to live. You can have trees on the street, you can have space for people. And, you know, community links have been proven to increase, so you end up with less loneliness in a community. You end up with more connection to people in your local neighborhood the fewer cars you have, and there's quite a lot of academic research on this. But you know, cars are a challenge for living in cities and smaller communities as well. Great. So this is a slightly hectic slide. But I just wanted to share some of the new ways that there are to share cars that people don't tend to know about, because quite a lot has changed in the last decade and not everyone is familiar with the ways of sharing cars. So on the left hand side here, I've got the sort of 4 boxes that are ownership or exclusive use. So this comes from the top: owning a car, obviously either by cash or finance; leasing a car, maybe from your work, or just you take out a lease on it. I've put a red box around this new type of leasing. So companies like Octopus Electric Vehicles and Onto allow people to lease an electric vehicle, an EV, by the month. So this is a potential solution if you need a car maybe over the summer holidays, but you don't you don't need one the rest of the time, or something like that. This is another way of exclusively using cars. Finally, on the left-hand side, there's conventional car hire, so Avis, Hertz, etc. To a degree, that sort of blends with the middle pillar, which is all about borrowing a car as a driver. So I'm going to just quickly go through this as well, and then maybe I think there's a couple of questions. So I've said there are 6 different ways of borrowing a car as a driver. We've got the members car club. So this is things like Co-Wheels and Zipcar that you've probably all heard of. They tend to be in larger cities, but you borrow a car, you sign up, you join, and you can borrow a car when there's one available. There's also, on the sort of right of that, there's community car clubs, and they tend to be slightly smaller areas, a similar structure to Co-Wheels or Zipcar, but restricted to a smaller group of people that have access. Then also in the red boxes, I've highlighted peer-to-peer lending, and this really is quite a new way of borrowing cars. What that means is that it's a bit like Airbnb for cars. Individuals let other people borrow their cars for money. Hirecast is one of the big UK-based companies doing this, and Turo is the big American one, but they essentially offer the same thing. You, as a driver, sign up, you request to borrow a car, just like you request to borrow an Airbnb. Within the price of that car is a fee for the person, a platform fee for Hirecast or for Turo, and your insurance. So you're insured to drive the car for as long as you borrow it. And these tend to be either shorter borrows, but quite a lot of weekend or holiday borrows as well, because it's much cheaper than borrowing conventional car hire, and often it's a lot more convenient because you don't have to go to the airport or whatever. So this is peer-to-peer lending. It's relatively new, but it's it's an interesting concept. What I'm doing, and I've highlighted this on the kind of the right in pink, is community peer-to-peer lending. So we are using Hirecast, but we've restricted it. So only people in our local community can see the cars that we're sharing. So we're sharing these cars, and I'll talk about it in a bit more detail in a minute, but within a network of about 8 streets. However, if you signed into Hirecast, you wouldn't see those 8 cars unless you lived on my street, because it's what's called a closed loop or a trusted group already. So this is the concept that I came up with, approached Hirecast to see if they could deliver it for us, and therefore this is very new. So we've just started doing this in September in Oxford. Nobody's done this in the UK before, to my knowledge. Moving on, and again, I'll let you interrupt with questions in a second. Of course, the other 2 sort of ways of borrowing cars as a driver is to get added to a friend or family member's permanent insurance. People have been doing that for years. But then on the right, there's this sort of new type of short-term car insurance. Vaygo is the big brand run by Admiral, the UK's largest car insurer, and this tends to be for younger people, where it's expensive for them to get their parents to add themselves to their insurance permanently. But the young person can, using Vaygo, add themselves to their parents' car for a day. And it might be expensive relatively, but it's still probably only like 20 quid or 30 quid for a day versus maybe 600 quid to do it for the whole year. And also it's the young person that pays. So you can add yourself to anyone's car, but obviously you can only drive the car if you have consent. So this is I think this is a very interesting space as well. Finally, on the right hand side is lift sharing, and I just wanted to be clear about this, because what I'm doing is not about lift sharing. Lift sharing is brilliant. All car sharing is brilliant, but it's different. Lift sharing is when you give somebody else a ride in your car. And again, at the bottom, there's sort of some slightly newer ways of doing this, internet-based stuff. So like lift sharing with others at your workplace. It obviously increases occupancy of cars. It's particularly good for workplaces because people will be commuting to the same destination. I know a little bit about this, but it's again, it's not what I'm really looking at. I'm looking at borrowing a car as a driver. Scott, any questions that I should answer now?
Yeah, hi, Emily. There are. One question is, okay, why does car sharing result in fewer journeys? And I mentioned your chocolate analogy, which I think is brilliant, but if you want to go for it.
Yeah, it's basically because if you don't have a car, the easiest default option is not to use a car. So humans are very kind of hardwired to do whatever is convenient. And so, anecdotally, and this isn't data, but when I had a car, if it was really raining and I needed to commute to the station, I would sometimes take the car, even though I knew it wasn't going to be great. Now I don't have a car, so I just put on a waterproof and cycle. And again, with my kids, if we have a car, my kids are nagging me if it's a bit cold outside to take the car to football. If if we don't have a car, they know that I will book a car if it's torrential rain and freezing. But if it's just a little bit cold or they can't quite be bothered, there isn't a car, so we cycle. So it's really changed how our family approaches things, again, simply because the easiest option is not a car. Whereas if there's a car outside your house, the easiest option is a car. I think there's some sort of stats as well about, like, if a car isn't outside your house, you know, if you have to walk like 500 meters to a car or something where you'd still have exclusive access, people use cars less as well, right? It's just to do with the convenience of having a car 5 meters from your front door that is yours, that means that you use them more.
And I have to back that up as well, Emily. That's certainly my family's experience.
Scott also went car free, right? You also used to have a car and now don't.
Yeah, I mean, we leased a car for 2 years when the kids were very little and they were spread out over 2 different sites, a nursery in one part of town and elementary, primary school another time, and I was traveling a lot, etc. So yeah, it made sense at the time to lease, but actually, you know, when you don't have it, you just, if you have to go get your Co-Wheels car, which we belong to Co-Wheels, it just, you think harder about that, and you're invariably grateful for not using the car. You just need that little extra motivation not to use it. So I have this saying I like to say, have car, use car, and that's true. I mean, we're all human. That's just human nature to do that. I also want to mention in the chat before we go on that Dan Scharf has put a link to Transport Decarbonization Plan, or to his blog, which talks about this plan, which does mention car sharing and new developments, which is important.
Absolutely, I've just seen the chat. Yes, and in fact, at the end, maybe I'll talk a bit about some of the really exciting potential I see for this, because actually, I think one of the amazing things we could do is, and is happening in Norway, is use electric car fleets. I'm talking about it now. So for example, municipalities or councils have electric fleets which they use during the day, obviously to like do their council tasks, but then they're not used in the evenings and weekends, which is peak time for people to borrow cars. And so there are municipalities in Europe who make those cars available to share peer-to-peer, or not peer, but like council to peer, only during those peak hours, which is an extra revenue stream for the council. And obviously it means that EVs are getting more used and people need to own fewer cars. So I think there's like really exciting stuff here, and 100% we should be promoting electric cars.
Emily, can I ask a question?
Go.
Your closed loop scheme, could it be a substitute for something like Co-Wheels? Because I've spoken to many people like in the west of Oxfordshire, where, you know, even in a big town like Whitney, they don't have Co-Wheels or any prospect of it right now. And certainly in some of the smaller villages, they just feel like it will never happen. Is this a possible substitute for that? Could it stand in for that?
So that's the other thing that I think is very exciting about it, is to offer a way of having shared cars in places that are too small for the big car clubs to invest in. So obviously cars are expensive when new, and in order to make their money back, car clubs need a certain asset utilization, which is about 20 or 25% depending on the club. So therefore they will only put a car in if they can see it being used that much in a short period of time, and many places just aren't suitable, so they're very far down the priority list, you know, or at least or will never happen. The great thing about peer-to-peer is that cars don't have to be used very much. They're not on average used very much, and most of it's a bonus if it does get used. So the person lending the car would otherwise not be using it, so they're just getting extra money for it, and maybe are not very bothered about getting money for it anyway. They'd just rather have the car used. So I think the other, yeah, exactly, that the really exciting potential is in areas too small for cars. I think in somewhere like Oxford, central Oxford, where I live, the only thing it really does is massively increase availability and proximity. So we have a Co-Wheels car nearby. It's often booked a lot in advance. It's difficult to book it for weekends. It's 200 meters away from me. But now I have 7 cars, 4 of which are closer than that Co-Wheels car that I can use anytime.
Mm-hmm.
And also that Co-Wheels car, as it happens, only has 4 seats. It's not suitable for me. So the closest Co-Wheels to me is a mile. But yes, I think so. What you said, Scott, yes, I think it's really exciting for places that are too small to attract other types of car club.
Now, here's a question put by Kate Wilson, which reminds me of a conversation that we've had, and I think we're finding the answer out as we go, but I'll just put the question, which is this closed loop approach most suitable for a small, very small area, maybe a couple of streets where people know each other exclusively, or is it scalable? Like, could you have a closed loop that encompasses a whole estate, like Florence Park? I guess we're going to find that out, because I know your intuition probably was the former.
Yeah, well, so in my area, I've sort of chosen the geographies based on kind of what makes sense. So in Iffley Fields, there's about 500 houses. It's about 6 streets. It's partly because I felt people would be comfortable lending their cars in this area. So in general, a lot of people doing it are not necessarily keen to lend their car to strangers on Hirecart, even though Hirecart is very verified and has trusted people. They're more comfortable lending them to neighbours. So that's why I picked this area, or sort of a smaller area. But I think it could work in a big area, particularly if you have an identity. So again, if you're in a village of 2,000 people or 2,000 houses, I think you would lend within that village. That would seem very kind of natural. Or if you're even in somewhere like Aynsham, which is 4,000 or 5,000 people, I think that would probably work as well. I think it might be more of a challenge if you took a big area like East Oxford. But you know, Scott, as you say, we'll find that out, won't we? Because we're experimenting with different sizes. So hopefully we'll know more about that.
That's right. That's right. So stay tuned, stay in touch with us, stay registered for more information. We had a question here about, Emily, in your various travels, in this space, and I know you've talked to a lot of the CEOs and people right at the top of this new space. Is there a discussion about some of them introducing some micro cars or micro electric vehicles like the Citroen Ami and others into these schemes, or maybe contributing starter cars in the way that I think you've mentioned?
So at the moment, Peertopeer is mostly looking at existing vehicles and then existing fleets. So that would probably rely more on using a business or a council or whatever that already had these, because obviously cars are growing too much. We should be using more micro cars. I suspect that people that have smaller cars are more environmentally aware and therefore more likely to loan them out. I haven't had that specific discussion, but it's a good question. I'll add it to the to-do list. Scott, can I move on?
I think we should, sorry, yes.
And then let's go back to some of the other questions. If I don't, I'll answer them. Cool. So this is just to give a bit more context in Oxford. The first launch loop I've launched, the only one that I've personally fully launched, is Evercart here. So this just sort of shows you the network of streets, right? This is in East Oxford. And again, hopefully this will show the kind of areas that we're looking at. So it's not just one street, it's sort of 6 or 7 streets. Scott and I discussed Flowcart, like, can we do it in such a big area? But we felt that Florence Park's got such a strong identity that people would be comfortable lending within this area. And realistically, people that have a car right over here are unlikely to walk right to the other end of Cornwallis to borrow one, because it's just too far. So we don't know yet, but we think hopefully it should work in a big area because it's got its own identity. Iffley might be the same. If I look at doing Iffley will be quite a big geographical area too, but yeah, don't know. And these are some of the other areas that people have expressed an interest in. Duns too, I'm very interested in because it's 500 people. And as you can see, some of these areas are a little bit bigger. And then there's been general interest from across the country. Maybe you guys can tell me if you are people from across the country dialing in. Great. So we have partnered with Hirecast. So I tested several different ways of car sharing before I went for the partnership with Hirecast. But basically the reason I loved it is that it's really simple. It's free to set up. They do all the tech. I just tell them where I wanted it, and it was easy to do. So just to go through how it works, you can see here there's a map. This is the map of Iffley Fields that I just showed you. These are all the cars that are available that people have put up. And there's a Golf, as you can see, and a Kia Picanto. This is just two of them. As you can see, the pricing's fairly different. Like, it depends how much people want to charge. I've realized I thought pricing would matter more. It doesn't hugely matter, actually, if you're borrowing cars, because you're saving on the cost of a car, and this is the fee that goes to the owner. So the overall fee is higher because it includes insurance and the platform fee. So you can see the total amount that I ended up paying for both of these, or for because you can get a quote before you actually hire them. So I didn't hire these two cars at this time, but this was how much it would have cost to hire the cars at this time. So hopefully that explains. Cars are rented by the hour, owners set their fee, insurance is charged hourly on top, and it varies by driver and car type. So I've spoken to the insurer, or a Hirecast insurance person, and they've got like 33 different bits of data. So it will significantly vary. It will not be the same for two different people. You use the app to see where the cars are and how much they cost. And then, as I said before, we're using Hirecar, but only people part of this if car loop, people who live on these streets, can see these cars. We can all see all publicly available hire cars. So if I go to like Glasgow, as I did, I could see all the publicly available hire cars there. It's just that I can only see these cars because I'm in the loop. Otherwise, you guys wouldn't be able to. One other point is, it was quite interesting. I had phone unlocking software installed, just like Co-Wheels has. And I had this in my car before I sold my car as an experiment. I did it for about 2 months. And actually, it is great. I don't think it's necessary in a community. I think it would be worth doing if you were planning to rent your car on a main hire car and planning to rent it out a lot, which is a great thing to do because, more car sharing. But we've found it very easy to just drop keys through people's letterbox, because in our area, people know each other well enough, as I think they tend to in small areas, everyone knows that you're verified by your driving license if you're part of the electoral roll if you're part of the scheme. So generally the car owners would just say, oh, I'll just shove it through your letterbox, or like sometimes I'll go and collect it, but normally we just use letterboxes and keys. We don't need the phone unlocking, but it's kind of a nice thing to have. Great. Finally, then, I'm just going to go through the difference between these 3 different types of thing and what we're doing. So car clubs, this is the Co-Wheels Zipcar model. They have an upfront joining fee. Cars have their own spaces. You book them on the app and then you unlock them with your phone, and you pay by the hour on top, or you have pay by the hour including insurance. Then you have an additional charge for mileage. I think what's good about them is that they're depersonalized and professional. As I said before, the key consumer issue is availability. Cars are often busy. As I said, they require a certain level of asset utilization to break even, and peak demand is weekend and evenings. They are also very expensive to hire for a period of time, and many don't allow dogs. So Hirecar then, peer-to-peer, no joining fee. Cars are owned by individuals. Many of them are unlocked by phone in main Hirecar. Again, you pay by the hour, including insurance, but you refill with petrol after you use. I think what's unique about this is the users are highly verified, but they're not people you know personally. There's lots of different cars available. It's cheaper than hiring for a weekend away. It's cheaper than hiring via Avis or Hertz for a weekend away, and it's probably pretty much price parity with Co-Wheels or Zipcar if you hire for an hour. It's slightly cheaper, but it kind of depends which car, which location, so it's a bit, and which insurance cost. So it's a bit hard to directly compare. So what we're doing then, again, no joining fee. Cars are owned by individuals. Generally, we just put keys through each other's doors. We pay by the hour, including insurance. And we have decided that you don't have to refill petrol if you drive under 10 miles. And this is to avoid the fact that it would be ridiculous to drive like 5 miles to the tip or to the supermarket and then have to drive 5 miles back the other way because Oxford doesn't have any petrol stations, to put in 50p's worth of petrol, because petrol is between 10 and 15p a mile only. So it just seemed a bit ridiculous to do that. So we all agreed that if you're driving a very local trip within Oxford, it's fine. If you're driving further, either refill it, which is what people normally do, or just check with the owner, and then I've left money beforehand, or actually, you can just arrange it directly with the owner. So I would say it tends to be more community-led communication and pricing. Like we message each other. I message the WhatsApp group saying, can I arrange a regular hire on a Wednesday because I need football, but I don't necessarily need that car. I only need it if it's like torrential hail. And so I know which cars are available, and there's 3 or 4 available. And that's good. Dogs and kids are decided by the owner. Cars are definitely more as is. So versus certainly a Co-Wheels or a Zipcar where there wouldn't be any of any personal possessions left in the car. Owners will leave personal possessions in the car if you are just borrowing it to nip to the supermarket. I've even used someone's supermarket bags, which was convenient because I didn't have them. You know, like it's a much more casual, like you're borrowing a friend's car more type thing. I think if I was borrowing a car for a longer period, people would clear stuff out. And sometimes they say, oh, the boot's full. Do you need to use the boot? And if I say yes, they'll empty the boot. But if I don't need the boot, then they won't bother emptying the boot. I think the many cars are in a local area, so it's like really convenient. I've got 3 and 50 meters of my house, and there is always availability for short peak trips, even in peak time. What I would probably say here is that on the hire car, on the middle column, if you're renting a car, you will generally get many more people borrowing it. So you'll have, if you rent it, make it available to everybody, understandably, you then end up with many more people borrowing your car, which is good if you want to earn money and bad if you just want to have it borrowed a couple of times a month. With us, with the closed loops, I'd say the borrows are much less frequent, like once a week, once every 2 weeks, that kind of thing. Finally, and I'm not going to go through this in detail, but on the left-hand side, this is the people that borrowed my car from public hire car when I owned the car. I just made it available to anyone. And this just sort of illustrates the type of borrows that people used for my car. So this is obviously illustrative, but you know, it's pretty standard. Doctors borrowing it for a weekend away, people picking up people from airports is a common one, and people that needed to go and collect something from London, basically. Then within the closed loop, it tended to be much shorter distances. So dad taking his kids to football because his car had just broken down. Somebody borrowed it for 3 days consecutively to go to work because her car had broken down. So I lent it for a week or 3 days. Someone went to the farmer's market, family went on a day trip. A musician took it overnight to Southend because he was playing a gig there. It turns out that musicians often get last minute notifications in sort of difficult to get to places, and they need to get back late at night. So yeah, that was a use case I hadn't thought about. And finally, then I'm going to say why I now borrow cars, which is 3 reasons. Take kids to places that are not on the bus routes or too far, or which I don't think I can safely cycle to. Occasionally, as I keep saying, I take my child to football or to the swimming pool if it's cold and wet, but mostly we just cycle. Trips to the supermarket or the tip or that kind of thing if the shop's too heavy to go on the back of my bike, which doesn't happen very often, but for example will happen the shop before Christmas, so I'll borrow a car to do that. Solves we don't yet have, so I think that school holidays, if you have a week away, that's a bit tricky, agreed in advance. So for example, for the summer holidays this year, someone's already offered their car up to Ifcar. They've said if you want to borrow it for a week, that's fine, but they've said, well, this is because I'm going to America on these dates. So if I want to borrow a car for the weekend in that week, brilliant, because I can borrow that person's car. But what this particular solve does not do is, if I decide I want to go on holiday from the 30th of March to the 5th of April, I'm not going to be able to use an Ifcar to do that. But it's okay because I'll just hire a normal car. But it would be nice to have that thing. Last minute weekends away, I think at the moment with 7 cars, it's not guaranteed that I'd be able to get one. I think if I plan in advance, I can ask people and someone will give me the car. But if I was like, oh, let's just go away right now, I may or may not, I couldn't guarantee to get one, put it that way. But then again, there's still other car hire scenarios. So I'm sort of not worried about that. But those are definitely the 2 things that I think it's tricky to do. Great, so shall I go? I think that's it before we talk about how to launch Sense Your Own. So let's questions on approach or other things. Scott, shall I look through or do you want to go?
I was just going to suggest, if you wanted to look through the chat, there will be questions there that really would benefit from your consideration, but maybe whilst
Joe,
you read that, right. I can talk about.
trusted and small proximity does increase supply. And in fact, you're right, it is the challenge for hire car generally. Actually, their challenge is matching supply and demand. Some areas have more supply, some areas have more demand. So it's matching, but I think overall, and there's generally some overlap, but overall supply is the biggest issue. People haven't quite yet got their heads around sharing cars. Most people don't know it's possible to do in a very secure, easy way. So I think the supply side is probably of the two the most difficult. Sorry, I'm now, sorry guys, I'm trying to work out how to do the chat. How have we marketed the scheme to the closing area? So well, we'll talk about this in a minute, but basically I set up a Google survey, which is extremely easy to do, shared it on street WhatsApp groups, printed some leaflets with a QR code and leafleted them. And the leaflets are about 30 quid, 40 quid to print, something like that. And then I just did the leafleting myself. And so, yeah, maybe about 40 quid, I'd say, plus time, obviously. It's time to set up. It's not that much time. Well, it's no time at all to administer. I set up a WhatsApp group as well. So, you know, sometimes we message on that. But yeah, it's not, I may go around and do door knocking or something in the new year to see if anyone else wants to sign up. But like, it's fairly simple to do. Great. Oh, are we using, from Daniel Schaff, are we using Hirecast? Yes, we are. Is Scott planning to use Hirecast? Yes, he is. Because they've developed this technology, because I kind of asked them if they could do it. So it's possible that some of the other firms like Turo or Getaround could do the same thing. But I was very impressed with Hirecast's flexibility of their tech, which is actually amazing. And Turo is a Silicon Valley owned VC-backed, huge billion-dollar valuation American firm, and I just don't think they'd be very easy to deal with. Hirecast are like a British startup that's been going, they're like the oldest one that's still running. I've met them now, I really like them. They're just nice people, and they've got a great tech officer, so it's very flexible. They're also now actually running quite a lot of community car clubs. So instead of Co-Wheels running it, what's happening is councils are, or not councils, or like parish councils, groups of people are buying a car, and then they pay a fee to hire a car, which I think is like 60 quid a month or something, and then they don't pay anything to use the car because they're already a member of the car, if that makes sense. That's what I mean about there being all these kind of new ways of sharing. Are there upper age limits? Great question, Ruth. So we had an upper age limit of 65, and people in Evercart fed back that actually that wasn't great, and could we raise it? So I went to Hirecast and got them to renegotiate it with their insurer, and it is now 75. So yes, you have to be under 75 to use them, but it is now a lot older than it was. Drivers between 65 and 75 are very relatively low risk, so it seemed appropriate to raise the limit. Nobody under 23 can borrow, and actually even if you're 23 to 25, it's probably very expensive to borrow, because like I say, the insurance is personalized. Yeah, I think that's kind of more or less it. Yeah, age limits. We've also said in Evercart that you need to sort of check with the owner if you want to take the car on a motorway or to somewhere very distant, which I think people would anyway. But like I say, you know, some people might be uncomfortable with their car being driven to Glasgow in case it broke down or something, which would be reasonable. So that kind of de-risks it as well. It's not like a Avis or a Hertz where you just take the car and you don't say anything. You know, you sort of say what you're planning to do with it generally. Hastings. Oh, great, Stephen. Iffley Village. Excellent. I'll remember that. Trisha, can you get some stats on Evercart? So I can't, because I don't have access to the data within Hirecast, right? Because of like GDPR, etc. I can't see what happens. I don't know. What I do know is that in the first month, it was, because I've spoken to them about the first month, it was 5 car loans on average, I think, per car. I think it was 5, it might have been 4, it was 4 or 5. So that's what I mean about like once a week. I think it's dropped off a little bit since then, once a week or 2. I think we do have 7 cars, because I can see them, and then I think we've got about 10 people borrowing in my area, because it's fairly demographically wealthy. We've got more cars than people, and I think that, or not more cars than people, but you know, you might assume that we'd have 30 people borrowing and 7 or 8 cars, but actually we've got about 10 people. Many of them it's for a second car, and they just don't need it very often. So I don't have up-to-date data, but hopefully that gives you some. Oh, Baz is using a Keysafe to pick up. That's clever. Rotating numerical codes. Yeah. Yeah. And so Baz has also said that car clubs, councils can be hesitant with creating car parking space for them. So it's also a limiting factor for companies like Co-Wheels expanding. Whereas obviously we don't have that problem because everyone's already got Res Park. Might the insurance company object to key through door if a claim was made for car theft? Probably. I think it's I actually honestly just don't know. I think it's unlikely that people will use community car shares to conspire to steal cars, and also Hirecar won't let very top end cars on, so because of the insurance risk. So if you and also the acceleration, so for example Teslas are not allowed, and I think probably top of the range like Lamborghinis, Ferraris, etc. Excuse me, hi Leah, I'm on a call. Yes, thank you. Does it matter if a car is owned on finance? I think it varies it depends if it's on a lease. If it's on a lease, the lessor will have terms and conditions, and it depends on which lessor it is. I don't know if it matters if the car is owned on finance, but you can message Hirecar and they'll be able to tell you. Minimum number of cars to start, great question. I think Baz has said he's doing it with one, and I think that's Scott and I will talk in a minute about how to set one up. You can absolutely set one up with one, or you can set one up with lots, as I did, and I'm going to be interested to see how Baz's loop goes, because he's done it in a different way, basically. I'm gonna let Scott talk in a minute. Good question, Joe. I do sometimes message people to check before booking and then book via the platform. I often message on Hirecar, so I'll say, is it available at this time? Leo, can you go down and close the door behind you? Thank you, sweetheart. So it depends, Joe, honestly. Like, say if I want it for a longer period of time or I want it close by, I will message the WhatsApp group and say, has anyone got a car this afternoon? Generally, I message an individual because I want an individual car. Child car seats. Great question, Tom. So there's a difference. I've got two different types of car seats. I've now got these amazing ones by Trunky, which are very good for short journeys. The kids can carry them, and it just makes life very easy. If I'm doing a longer journey, then I want the side protection, and then I either borrow my friend Claire's car, which has got a car seat in it that fits my child, because she's got a child the same age as me, so I just use her car, or I could I do keep some car seats in my house. Nick, so how to engage the potential users? Well, actually, I was quite surprised. Does it self-build? Yeah, so loads of people, well, 7 or 8 people offered their cars. I haven't put in that much energy, but I do live in an area where we have a Facebook page and street WhatsApp groups. So that was kind of quite easy. And then leafleting people. I also we had a jumble sale. So I sat outside and chatted about it, and people came and talked to me in the jumble sale about the car sharing idea. So I think people knew who I was, they knew where I lived, and so they were very up for lending their cars. Like I say, I think I'm going to do another round next year to try and get more people to sign up for it, because quite a lot of people were like, oh, I'll sign up, and then at the last minute they were a bit like, oh, this is new, or I'm not sure about it, but let me know in a couple of months if it's working, and then I'll think about signing up then. So hopefully that will happen. I'm conscious we're super over time. Scott, I'm going to just go to the next question, and then maybe we can pick up some at the end. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Brilliant. So I will let you talk through this slide, how to set up a loop.
Yeah, I would say the only thing I'm adding here to what you've already said, Emily, is that, so in addition to leafletting the neighborhood, and also we had tables at a few community events around to do with Christmas market or winter fairs and markets at some of the local community events here. The leaflet themselves will send people to a Google form, a Google survey. So, and it'll just ask them questions about, car sharing, if they're interested, and are they coming at it as a potential user of a car, or someone who might provide a car into it, but could use access to a second car themselves, or a whole variety of things, of course, we can share that survey with you, and you can chop and change as you like. In fact, we did an A/B test to 2 different kinds of survey leaflet to see which one had a bit more take up. In fact, one of them did have a lot more take up.
Yeah.
And then the lovely thing about the Google form is it harvests people's email addresses if they agree to do that. So then you've immediately got a group to start working with. And that's all I can say for Florence Park, is that's where we are now. I think we've I wouldn't say saturated, but we've definitely leafleted everybody. We've been at all these events, and I think we've got 60 or so email addresses of people who are interested, which is amazing. So we're just at that stage now where we will just ping those people and say, okay, now here's what the next step might be for those who are interested.
And I'll just throw out here on point 4, I've put they can also do a loop with email addresses. So I don't know anyone that's done this yet, but you could get a group of friends together and share a car. You just tell Hirecart and they'll do that kind of closed loop for you. Or you could, if you all had the same type of email address, like Oxfordshire County Council.co.uk or NHS.co.uk, or even I'm talking to the church, a church in Ealing, you could have all people with a Church of England email address or something like that also able to share cars. So there's a load of flexibility within the type of closed loop. I have not launched or spoken to anyone that has a loop like this, but I think it could be really interesting. I am now going to just see this number 1 tip, right, is to do it your own way. So again, Baz has reflected this in West Oxford launching with 1 car, but you could start by being a loop of 2 people, add more people later. You could do a loop of everyone in your church, or like people that folk sing and use cars, or like a mosque, a cooperative, etc. So our way, Scott and I have done it in the same way, but you don't have to go out and do it with an geographical area and leafleting and all that, like literally do it your own way. Hirecart's up for trialing anything. They've set up an easy way of doing it. They've hired someone specifically to look at this who'll be joining in January. So they'll have like a named contact. At the moment, it's part of someone else's job. So it's free. It doesn't take any time. They're learning. They're being like super helpful. Just whatever you think. I would definitely recommend doing a trial month if you're launching with lots of people, because it's easy to put off signing your car up. But if you say to people, we're doing a trial between the 15th of January and the 15th of February, for example, people will then sign up their cars. People will then experiment with whether they can live without a car. That's what I did when we did our trial. I only rented my car out and I only borrowed other people's cars to see what it was like. It gives people a time frame in which they should experiment. So if you're launching with loads of cars, I'd recommend that. If you're launching with 1 or 2 cars, it doesn't really matter. And finally, decide what you're going to do with petrol. I explained what we did and our rationale for it, but it's probably a good thing to decide. Great. So we are now done on the presentation. So let me just should we just go through questions then? I know we are running quite a lot over time now, or we're just starting to run over time. People are happy for me to carry on, and if not, just drop off. Great. So I'm just going to go back to that. Andy, does the car owner maintain their car availability on Hirecart calendar? If you're putting your car out to main Hirecart, in other words, to the general public, yes, you need to do this. We don't tend to in the closed loop, to be honest. What I get people to do instead is say when their car is generally available in the description of the car. So it would say, I commute Monday to Friday with my car, but it's available at weekends, so that a user can see when the car is likely to be available, and then they would probably message to ask to borrow the car before they just request the time. So on Hirecart you can message, and then you can message an owner, but then you can subsequently request the car. So you would be most likely, or at least what I think what most people do actually using it, is to say, Lisbeth, I see your car's available at weekends. Is it available this Saturday in the afternoon? And then she'd reply to you saying either yes or no. And then if it's yes, you then book the car. That's how we've worked it out in the closed loop. But if you lend to the general public, as I did, you need to make sure that your car is relatively up to date. How do you set up insurance for the closed loop version? It's set up as part of Hirecart. It's the same thing. So you just use their system, and it will automatically insure you for the time that you're borrowing the car. Is it no time to administer? Yeah, no, it is. It is not taking any of my time to administer. I'm not getting many questions or people expect me to resolve issues. I did at the beginning. definitely. That's what I mean about it's upfront. Occasionally I get a WhatsApp question. I'd say I get about 3 maybe a week or something, but they're more like, has anyone got a car to borrow, or has anyone seen this, what the transport minister said. It's that kind of thing. I've never had to resolve an issue, because Hirecar resolve all the issues. So if people have an issue, it gets resolved with the platform. So Baz is putting the availability of his car on the app. Hirecar do provide breakdown cover. Good point. Is there any age on flex? There is no flexibility on the age of the car. That's because of their insurer. The cars have to be less than 15 years old. One of our members is concerned about needing their car at short notice, e.g. if their elderly mother is suddenly taken sick. So I also, that was one of my concerns, because I have 3 kids under 7. And then what I did is I thought about the emergency situations that could happen. And then I realized that if one of the kids got sick, I would anyway not want to put them in a car and drive them to the John Radcliffe. I would either be calling an ambulance or getting in a cab. I thought that if my elderly mother got sick, she's in Bristol, I also, if that happened at 3 a.m, I also really wouldn't want to get in my own car and drive if I was worried about my mum being ill. I would just get a cab. Now, obviously a cab to Bristol is probably going to be like 200 quid. But if it's a one-off and I don't spend £300 a month on owning a car, actually 200 quid's not really very much. And then when I get to Bristol, I could hire a car to sort of help out. So this may be different for people that live in small villages, but even people that live in small villages are generally looking at this to share a second car, so would still probably have the first car. And I feel if an emergency happened during the daytime, I would be able to message people on the loop to say, can I borrow a car? Obviously, if it happens at 3 a.m, it's a bit trickier, then I'd just get a cab. But that was my solution to those concerns. Do we have any any EVs? Depends on the person. I'm going to hire, it depends on whether anyone's got an EV to share. I'm going to borrow an EV from Octopus EVs for a month over Christmas to experiment, and they are up for working with Hirecar potentially in the future. They can't do it for me right now because they're just launching, but they are going to see if they can maybe work out a way of sharing, which would be great. Do I have a Google Doc similar stash of facts? What I need to do is make my website, which is shareourcars.com, easier to access the info I've got on there. So I will take that as an action. What sort of leafleting worked and what didn't work? I only did one type of leaflet. I think, what we'll do is we'll share our leaflets and then you can have a think about what worked. I think my first one was a bit detailed, it was a bit wordy, and then Scott and I made it a bit less wordy. Scott will absolutely share the Google surveys that will work best so that people can copy. How do people get invited, added to the loop? Great question. That is done manually at the moment by somebody in Hirecar, which is not how it will be going forwards. What happens in Evercart area is that if somebody is in these streets and signs up to Hirecar, they are automatically added to the loop because we assume that they're doing it because they sort of want to be part of the loop. But there will be a way of solving that. And there is an admin and invite link as well. Out of interest, what is the ratio of car owners to non-car owners in your loop? I think it's probably about 7 car owners and about 10 non-owners. But some of the 10 are also car owners that are like they're the husband or the partner of someone that owns a car. So I don't quite know. Baz has, again, given Baz knows more about this than me. Thank you. So the loop that's set up with email addresses, Hirecar need 1 or 2 people to administer. Yes, we have leaflets and communications that we can use. I'll share some info afterwards and a link to sources. Does the insurance cover things that people that are often extra loaded, like musical instruments or including bikes or things like that? Pippa, that is a good question. I don't know, but Hirecar's website will have info on that, and we use the same insurer and the same insurance that they do for their general purpose. So it should either be on that, or if you drop me an email on shareourcars@gmail.com, I'll forward it to the insurance person in Hirecar and I can get you an answer. lost my cursor. Where did I source my info on cost of car ownership at about £300 a month? This is from a source called Nerd Wallet. I did several cross-references. Quite a lot of the sources ignore depreciation. So if you see a figure quoted at about £1,500, that's because they don't include depreciation. So Nerd Wallet is that particular fact, but I looked it up and cross-referenced from about 3 or 4 different sources. If you Google it, you should find, if you get the ones that don't talk about the annual cost of car ownership, but also include depreciation, you should find that number more or less, you know, the standard. Great, we will indeed be putting up the recording somewhere. If anyone has any further questions, shout now, or feel free to drop me or Scott or anyone an email, or just go to shareourcars.com and then there should be more of this information there. And thank you all so much for attending.
That looks great, Emily. I think yeah, people are just saying how appreciative they are, and that's great. I think you've covered all the questions that were in the chat, at least, and your website's up there, and we'll have all those details available, and maybe you and I can talk about the communication that we sent to the Eventbrite.
Great.
Yes, so I'm going to stop the recording now.
Brilliant. And Alistair, I agree to you. Just adding people to your